gentlemen, my name is Guy Opperman. First of all, thank you for coming. I'm the Member of Parliament for Hexham, and this is the first of 4 separate public meetings that we're going to hold in respect of Storm Arwen. There's a lot to discuss. There's certainly a lot of things that I know a lot of people want to raise, but I'm going to try and explain the process by which we're going to do this. First of all, matters of COVID. Please keep your mask on, all right? Clearly, it really matters. The doors are wide open. If in any way you feel unwell, then please, I'll probably ask you to leave, but we're just trying to be really sensible. If you are going to ask a question, please stick your hand up and then obviously take your mask off, ask the question, put your mask back on, all right? We're all trying to keep our distance. We're all trying to be doing this sensibly. This is being live streamed to lots more people, and it is very much the case we want to do this in a safe way. The purpose of what we're trying to do is fundamentally threefold. The first is to ensure that all the constituents get paid. Is the blunt truth. A lot of people lost power, had consequences to this, and it is very important that there is the opportunity for everyone to understand how the payment process works, how it is they have been paid so far, but more importantly, if there is any glitches in the system, if you haven't been paid, you don't understand it, that you have the opportunity either to make your case tonight or to make representations. I've got Victoria and Chris who are in the corner, who work for MPG, who are going to follow up specific cases. So rather than getting into the nuts and bolts of your individual losses tonight with everybody here, I'm going to ask you to deal with that. I'm going to try and deal with broad picture stuff tonight to the best of our ability. But again, this is the first meeting, so we'll just see how it goes. All right? The second bit is we clearly accept that this is one of the worst storms that this community has ever had. All right? And the consequences, nearly 1 million trees down, hundreds of power cables down, are absolutely massive. Now, how we then deal with that is clearly something we want to analyse, and there are clearly lessons to be learned. And there are 3 separate inquiries that are going on. The County Council is doing a scrutiny committee inquiry, which is an ongoing process. The Department for Business, who are effectively the government in this process, they're doing it, but the main inquiry is the independent inquiry by Ofgem, who is the independent regulator for energy, who is looking at this in a very serious way. They are watching what we are saying right now. We are live streaming this, and Ofgem are watching it. Anything that you say or submit tonight will go to form part of the evidence that goes into them. All right? So it's slightly ham-fisted because I haven't got a live camera and I can't switch it to all of you. But we're just going to do the best we can, frankly, in the world of Omicron and in the world of limited capabilities. But it is being recorded, it is being watched by those who are then going to try and come up with a plan to do this better going forward. And the third bit that we want to try and do is so I have experience of this as the Member of Parliament who had the worst flooding event since the 1770s when Storm Desmond hit the River Tyne. And Storm Desmond was without doubt a catastrophic situation, but we then spent the best part of 6 to 12 months ensuring that all the respective agencies, the Local Resilience Forum, Northumbrian Water, the Environment Agency, all those agencies were better prepared for future flood events. For example, we now lower the level of Kielder Reservoir during the winter to ensure that it doesn't overtop, so it is 15% lower to take into account severe storms. We then have a capability that means there's 15% water going down the Tyne. Those sort of smart strategies are what we're trying to look at and how we get people better resilient and better sorted. There are clear things, before we even say a word tonight, that we all know. Comms has to get a lot better. We all know that the communications during this process went down. Partly that is the severity of the storm that took everybody by surprise. Partly that is the fact that electricity is required for certain communications. There's no point saying people have got to email us in if you haven't got the power to charge up your computer. And we have to have a very serious long-term discussion about how it is we deal with significant losses of power, not just for our community, but for the wider community of the country. So what we talk about and what we deliberate is a really serious thing. There's no question about that. That particularly applies in rural areas. So I'm going tomorrow night to Bellingham to talk to the Upper North Tyne, and in 2 weeks' time we obviously speak to Hexham and Hayden Bridge, and subsequently we then do on the last Friday in January we go to the West Allen Valley and to Allendale, which was completely out of power. And there are huge issues there with farmers and loss of power for water and stock and supply and really complex stuff. So those are the three purposes of tonight. I'm not going to fix every one of your problems. I'm not going to be able to answer every one of your questions. The process is that what I'm going to invite everybody to do is as follows. So I'm going to try and set the scene in a bit more detail. I'm then going to let Paul Glendinning, who has the lucky task of having to represent Northern Power Grid tonight. There are other representatives of MPG here tonight. I'm going to invite Paul then to say a few words and to explain their position and how they are. And I'm going to try and get him to set out where the law is in terms of compensation and things like that. And then I've got Ross from Northumbrian Water, who's going to say a few words. Affects you guys less, but particularly affects the farming community, so I'm going to ask him to say 2 to 3 minutes. And obviously, we're then going to try and get into the nuts and the bolts. I've got plenty of information about telephones and Vodafone, EE, BT, because everybody struggled, particularly in rural communities, Otterburn in particular, I think Ingo and Lineup Hill, various parts of Allendale, without any access to any telephone, let alone mobile signal and internet. So that is a problem going forward. I'm not going to get too much into the nuts and bolts and the weeds of that at this present stage. So that's the broad thrust of what I'm going to do. I'm going to be in a position that I'm going to invite Paul to say 3 or 4 minutes. I'm in his hands as to sort of who he is, what he represents, what they've done, and also how the lessons that they've learned already. Don't have a go at him yet. There's a chance to have a go at everybody later on, but just let him have his say. Paul.
Thank you. Evening, everybody, and thanks for coming along.
You've got to speak up, don't forget.
Yeah, I'm trying to speak up with a slight throat, not COVID. Paul Glendinning, Director of Policy and Markets. I'm on the Executive Board for Northern Power Grid and look after the policy and coordination with the markets and Ofgem, etc. I've got some colleagues with us here tonight. Guys already mentioned it. In the back corner over there, we've got Victoria Dove and Chris Mitchell, who are going to help with individual queries and take information down to put into our CRM system if we haven't got your details. And at the front here, I've got Matt Preston, who's the General Manager for Northern Power Grid in this region, and Dave Brown, who's the Engineering Manager in this region as well. So we've got plenty of people on hand to answer the questions that you might have. From our point of view, we are here to listen. We thank everybody for coming out. We understand it's been an incredibly difficult time for our customers, with some customers off supply for 10 days. Really difficult situation. And I think it's important to try and understand from our point of view what we did in the gap from when it went off to the end. And I'll take some questions on that. I've got probably 2.5 hours of material, so the 3 minutes that we've got, it's
Take 4 or 5, it's okay.
Not going to get where we need to get, but there's some headline numbers I think which is quite interesting. Probably, if everybody's seen the trees down, there's stories about a large percentage of Kielder forest that's been blown down. A lot of tree damage in Northumberland, and the storm that was flagged by the Met Office, and we've got the exact quotes from the Met Office, turned out to be correct. We think that the forecast that we got was excellent, so we were very well prepared. And on that Friday and the Thursday leading up to the Friday, we were stopping planned work, we were bringing in extra linesmen and workers and getting ready to respond. When the storm hit us, which is somewhere around about 10 p.m. on the Friday night, that's when things start to go. Between 10 p.m. on the Friday night and the Sunday morning, we had about 280,000 customers off supply. So incredible situation. And on the Sunday, the call centre volumes were through 20,000 that managed to get through and were holding. When we're set up, even, we did bring extra people in, of course, but we're normally set up to handle 850 calls per day. That's the sort of the standard level that we'd expect on a normal day. So on that Sunday, we were overwhelmed. And the next thing that happened to us while we were trying to get out and assess the damage, was that our website went down because of the volumes that went in. And one of the toughest challenges we had was not actually rebuilding the network, getting people back on, was that the internet went down, and the scale of the difficulty for the internet was that it took to the Thursday from the storm hitting on the Friday night. It took to the Thursday for the internet traffic to drop to the not to normal, to the level of the highest internet traffic we've ever had. It took to the Thursday. So this is where we're having customers coming to talk to us on multi-channels. And clearly, one of the learning opportunities, and actually we have the website's being renewed at the moment, and hopefully will be up and running late Q1. We had a piece of code ready to go that if Storm Barra had actually hit us in any way, that, and unfortunately for us it didn't, we had an internet page ready to go that would have filtered some of those calls and give people like a queuing system that you might see on retail websites to understand where you were in the queue, to try and haul up rather than going down. So we did have some terrific volumes going through. And the next thing really I want to bring up is one of the things that we do. We have a website system that gives an algorithm that gives an estimate for when a customer who's experienced a fault is likely to be returned to service. And in the week, once we went through onto Saturday and into Sunday, we realised how bad it was. On the Monday and Tuesday, we had to take that off and take that away because it was giving people false positions on when the website, when your supply would come back on. And one of the things that we knew inside North Parkway, but the media in the world didn't pick up on, was that it was right for 90% of the customers. So if you think about the system that we set up, 280,000 people went off, 90,000 of them were back within 48 hours. On the Sunday, we were trying to put helicopters into the air to assess damage, but helicopters couldn't fly because the wind was still too strong. We've got wind records at Met Office stations to show this, because we were trying to push the helicopter guys to get into the air to assess the damage. We couldn't do it because they couldn't fly. So it wasn't until the Monday that we got the choppers into the air. On the Monday night, I was in the control room when the chopper guy sent his report verbal in through the system while he was on his way back to upload the photographs. And he said, "This is the worst damage I've seen in all of the times I've flown this helicopter across the years that's happened to your network." That was Monday night at 8 o'clock. He was particularly talking about the Weir Valley and the Tees Valley, Northumberland, slightly different type of situation. And we had 2 damage areas. So as we started to assess the damage, we had total devastation in the Weir Valley, total up to St John's Chapel, total devastation in the Tees Valley, up to High Force and Teesdale. But in Northumberland, what we had was we did have the poles down, but we had more wind-borne debris because you had a lot of trees being uprooted and trees hitting the poles. Now there was a little bit of derision in the press in the first week around somebody had said, and was quoted I think on a parliamentary question, to say that the wind came from the wrong direction. And what he was trying to say was that there was 2 issues about the wind. One was it was gusting, Met Office measured 98 miles an hour, which is incredibly strong. And secondly, because it came from the north, it had an element of snow in it. We've got photographs of what's called ice accretion, where the ice builds up on the overhead line. And we've had 4 and 6, and I've even seen some at 8 inches of ice on the overhead line, which brought it over. So we did have those 2 weather issues that caused the damage. The other thing that you should be aware of is that the biggest storm that we've had keeps going backward. Was it the windiest? Was it the iciest? Put together its gold medal in more. Probably the Met Office is telling us about 1953. Now what's significant about 1953, for those in the room that might be able to remember that, was that the networks in Northumberland and Weardale, Teesdale weren't actually built at that point. So this may well be the first time that network woodwork, as it was designed, was hit by that type of storm. And, you know, we've got some photographs, I've got some photographs of people interested in this pattern of material here, where the wooden pole, if you can imagine, you all know what they look like now, around about 12 inches thick, has snapped a third of the way up as the ice went onto the wire and ripped the pole across. Some of them, particularly the ones I saw in the Weir Valley, it just knocked the pole over, lifted it up. So when we came to the rebuild, we were able to reset the pole and put it back, and we could move on to the next one. But quite a few were snapped. And one of the things that in this type of storm, it's the wood pole design that gets criticised, and people are asking, why can't you build them bigger and stronger and uglier and you know, more effect? That will certainly be part of the reviews. The standard that it's built to looks at different storm levels, and roughly speaking, we know if it goes over 65, gusts into 75, there will be some damage. So here we're in 90s, and because interestingly enough, because the helicopter guys wanted to fly, they were monitoring the wind. They can only fly after a certain when the wind drops to a certain point as well. So we have the detailed records, and from the Friday night at 10 p.m. till sometime on the Sunday, the wind was causing damage. So it was above 65 miles an hour. So that gives you an idea of the extent of the damage. Once we got through and we got everybody put on, like I said, we had 90% back in 48 hours. And what you've got is a comet's tail of customers, which sounds, you know, like we need to get through this. And in Northumberland, we had the issue of sparsity. So you might have, we had a situation where on the last 2 days of the reconnection, we had 400 linesmen working for 2 days that connected the last 1,600 customers. So an enormous effort to get customers back, and it was working the one job pack that the guys wanted to do might get back 1.5 customers per pack. So that gives you the size of the scale. So once we got through that, got everybody back, the times when I was talking to Guy and the other MPs in the area, we said, we're going to push on and get compensation running, and that's what we did. So the standard that we run to, the guaranteed standard compensation, gives us 90 days. In those 90 days, what we're asked to do under a normal storm condition is to assess who was off, work out when they were off from the start to the finish, work out what their payment is, and send them a check. We have 90 days. We knew that the scale of the storm, we geared up, we had 40 people flat out trying to sort that out. We started around about the 8th of December. By Christmas Eve, which was, I think, Friday, we had 80% of our compensation checks issued. Now, I know, and there's been some, and there will be some here, we got some of those wrong because of the speed, I guess, that we went at. Different lists were being pushed forward and read through. A lot of our customers, we don't have the name, address, and phone number for. We don't send anybody a bill from Northern Power Bill. We have to get that information sent by your suppliers. So there's some mismatches. So it was round about 1,600 checks we sent out to the wrong person. So they had to be returned, cancelled, and reissued. And then there was other batches of checks that went out, the people had moved, and nobody knew who it was that the check was for. So there's a whole host of different issues, and Victoria and Chris can record if there are any in this room, people who've received checks who haven't got checks. But at this moment in time, we've issued about £8.5 million worth of compensation. Compensation we've boosted up with goodwill payments that you'll see, and in that period of time, we've also covered welfare payments for people. Once we knew that we weren't going to get people back a sensible moment, then we were saying to people, we will take you to a hotel, you can move out, go to a hotel, or you can have hot meals paid for, and try and make it as comfortable as we possibly could for the people who still have. So we're in the middle of trying to we're right at the end of trying to sort out the compensation payments. We're still working through the welfare claims, and perhaps if we met in a month's time, we'd be almost complete with that work. So I think that's where I'd leave it now, Guy, and take.
So, thank you for that, Paul. Just to make the point on compensation, It's not something dealt with specifically by the company. So the country as a whole has Ofgem, an independent regulator, who sets the way in which the compensation is made. So it's not a case of an individual company, good, bad or indifferent, is saying, I'm going to pay this, that and the other. This is a regulatory process that is established by an independent regulator. Within that, there are clearly anomalies and there are complications. You need to have the right details of people. And one of the messages I very much want to get out today is that if you know of somebody who you think is entitled to a payment and they have not received it, please get in contact either with my office, get in contact with MPG Direct. I will get Paul later on to read out the specific website address that they need to do. But the simple point is there is plenty of time. And if you were affected and this process is an ongoing process, we will still give you compensation. But clearly, if you haven't been contacted, then you need to make sure that you get in contact. The second point I'd make is in relation to the way in which compensation is done. There is no automatic right as a citizen in this country that my power goes off, I therefore get entitled to compensation. It doesn't work like that. We pay our taxes, we pay contributions for these particular things. There is a cut-off point after 48 hours when the compensation kicks in. After that, then there is a compensation process. All right? Now, this is also, bear in mind, ultimately borne by people who actually are paying for the power. But the simple point is, we can go through and we'll try and answer some of the specifics about why haven't I been compensated with this, that, and the other. And we'll talk about everything from freezers to nights out to the quality of the hotel you will have to stay in or whatever in a bit more detail, but I'll come to that. The second bit is the way in which one of the key lessons I want to learn is there's a term in business which is called silo thinking, which is we want to try and stop that. So the silo thinking is that individual companies, MPG or Northumbrian Water, are doing their bit but aren't necessarily talking to and communicating in the middle of a crisis when communication is difficult with everybody else. And certainly as an MP's team and as some of the county councillors here who are here tonight, and I know Richard's here and Veronica's here and others are here, then it is very, very difficult if you're not in the loop of that. And all of the comms, for all of us, trust me, was extremely difficult. We get that. We're not going to fix that tonight, but if nothing else, we hope that the Ofgem inquiry will come up with a better plan. Now, the thing that Paul didn't necessarily stress was there is already a national resilience plan. And that means whereby if a power company in location A, northeast, has a problem, then power companies around the country are required, as part of an agreement, to come up and help out. So we had people from Belfast who were fixing the power lines in Bamborough. We had people from down south who were working in the Allen Valleys. And it's not just one company, it's all the power companies clubbed together and make it happen together. So that already exists, probably not as well known as everybody should know about it, but it definitely exists and it definitely works. Where I just want to make sure that we learn lessons is there is what is called the Local Resilience Forum. Now the Local Resilience Forum was set up by previous governments and totally endorsed by this government after previous disasters. And basically it gets together all the key players from the county council to the police, to the fire brigade, ambulance, all the social services, everyone who knows where vulnerable people live, and they are then in charge, ultimately, those are the people who are in charge of the response on a local level, and that is run out of individual county areas. And it's set up, whether it is in terms of a terrorist incident, it's set up in terms of a sort of a storm like this, or a flooding incident. That's how we run these things, and a successive, and all governments, oppositions agree that's the right way forward. The question is, though, how do we make sure that improves going forward? Because there is no doubt that the Local Resilience Forum were good, but can we get it better? I'm certain we can, and this process, I'm sure, can make that happen. So, I'm going to ask Ross, where is Ross? Ross, come and say a few words. So Ross represents Northumbrian Water, less so applying for here, but in particular where water is required because it's powered by electricity to your house, then it really, really matters. Ross, do you want to say a few words? Come a little bit closer in a socially distanced way. Stay there and you will be in shot. and give us your 2 to 3 minutes and explain who you've got here.
Yeah, so I'm Ross Smith, I'm Partnerships Manager at Northumbrian Water, and thanks very much, Guy, for organising this meeting, and thanks to everyone who's come, because as you've said, I think it's really important that we understand the lessons from this and get ourselves in the best possible shape if we are going to face anything like this again in future. I should say I'm joined by colleagues from our water networks teams and our customer team here tonight as well, so that we can take any detailed questions that you might have. Just to summarise the challenges that we faced during Storm Arwen, the big issue was that we had mains power out to 55 of our operational sites. That includes water treatment works, where we clean and process the water for distribution, and pumping stations, which move it around our network. And our ability to address that was hindered by a couple of things in particular. One has already been talked about, the fact that communication networks were severely impeded, which meant both that our control room didn't have the same level of visibility of the data around the levels of water in different parts of the system that they would usually have in order to be able to respond to a situation like that, and B, that we didn't have the ability to be in touch with our customers that we would normally have through some of those usual channels to understand what impact that was having on the ground. And then the second thing was the issue of access, which meant that both in getting to our own sites in order to tackle the issues that we face there, and getting out to customers' properties in order to be able to support them was a lot more difficult, obviously, because of fallen trees and snow. The way in which we responded to that was obviously, firstly trying to rectify the situation that we faced. So we had about 40 generators up and running in order to try to get power back to some of those assets. And then secondly was to address the impact that was having on our customers. And we had, I think, about 5,000 bottles of alternative water that were distributed around the area to help customers who found themselves out of supply. We have the best record in the industry when it comes to minimising interruptions to supply for our customers, and that's something that we pride ourselves on. Obviously, this was a particularly exceptional event, and we do know that we had many customers who found themselves without water on account of this situation. And we are currently working our way through the data to understand that, to understand which of our customers were out of supply, how long they were out of supply for, and the reasons for that. And as has been mentioned, similar to the electricity industry, there are regulated payments that are due to customers in certain circumstances if we don't meet those standards of service. And so we're working our way through that. We expect to have that complete by the end of this month, and they can be applied automatically to customers' accounts. There are, I guess, a number of lessons that we're looking to learn from this. One is about how we are resilient in terms of power, and so thinking through, do we have the right number, the right type, and the right location of those generators in order to be able to get power back up and running if we as quickly as possible if we face a similar scenario in future. There's issues around utilising a network of local contacts when it comes to distributing those alternative water supplies when we're faced with a situation like this, where we've got a number of people out across a wide area. It's particularly useful to be able to work with people on the ground who know those communities and who can respond to distribute those quicker than our teams can by getting out on the ground themselves. And then thirdly, we put in place a model that I think worked well in terms of getting water out to people who aren't our direct customers but found themselves again out of water because of a lack of power. So particularly farms who have private water supply, So just to finish, I think we'd really like to thank our employees who were working round the clock in difficult conditions, particularly as many of them faced similar disruption in their own homes as they live in the communities that were affected as well. I'd like to thank all the partner organisations who we worked alongside in addressing this, including the emergency services. But particularly we'd like to thank our customers who were extremely patient and supportive in a very difficult situation and very difficult circumstances, and we're really grateful to that as well. But if you've got any specific questions, obviously, that relate to water, then we're here and we can take those during the course of the evening.
Ross, thanks very much indeed. Can I know who is the designated person who's going to do with sort of localised water of all your team who are here, who's going to stick that? The blonde lady at the back has kindly stuck her hand up if you've got a specific problem that you want to raise with her later on. Okay, so I'm going to get into questions in a second, and I'll warn them that I'm going to come to Gillian Purdy of Pontview in a second, but I'll also come to Alma of Runnymede Road after that. But I think Paul, I think that we need to start with the key one, which I think many people's concern is that on multiple occasions, obviously we all get the comms were down, and you've given the explanation for that, and we need to get that better, and that's a work in progress. And Lord knows, everybody knows comms were down, okay? But the real problem, and the problem also that the Local Resilience Forum had, and the County Council and the police and others had, is that people kept being told this will be resolved within 24 hours, or they were told your power will come back on tomorrow or the next day. Whereas I think there is, and obviously aspiration is a wonderful thing, but how did that come to pass? Because I think that's a genuine, legitimate question. And secondly, how do we ensure we have a better system going forward? Because too many people either didn't move out because they thought it was going to get me on in a day or so, with the consequence that they basically had to suck it and see and live through great difficulties, or they were in a position that things were compromised in their lives in a great deal of way. Their lives were much more complicated. I realise I've just asked you an almost impossible question to answer when you're answering every single place in the whole of the Northeast, basically. And I'm not going to pin you down on this, but it's the broad principle of how do we get to a situation where too many people were told it's going to be resolved within 24 hours, and how are you going to make that work better so it doesn't happen again?
So that's obviously one of the big questions that we've been working through over the last few weeks. And the answer, it's not straightforward. It wasn't just one person typing the wrong number in. It's not a straightforward answer. And let's stick with the way in which the automated systems work at first. And so the fault comes in on business as usual. This building could go off tonight. As soon as we receive a call saying that this building's off, we'll go into our systems, they'll work out when it is likely to come back on, and there'll be text messages, information on the website saying you'll be back on by midnight or 3 in the morning or tomorrow. For 90% of our customers that were off in this storm, it worked. What we realised next was that this algorithm wasn't going to take us much further than the Monday. So we did start to look at it on the Monday into the Tuesday about how we should move forward. And there's an element of we were trying to be optimistic and pushing our guys to work hard, and maybe that's something that we should look at. But the other side was that by the Tuesday, I will say, but maybe it took to the Wednesday, we took the postcode map off the website so that we weren't given wrong information. Once we realised that we had a problem, we then stopped putting the wrong information up. And what we then moved to was a list of postcodes, if anybody can remember going onto that website, a list of postcodes that will be in the next 24 hours, and a list of postcodes that we were describing to ourselves and the management team as a fog of war. So that, they're out there somewhere. We haven't got the program for them yet, but they are not in the next 24 hours. And there was probably 1 or 2 days, I would say, there might be people in this room that tells me it's longer than that, but the memory that we've got is, the detail we've got is 1 or 2 days where some wrong information was given on the phones. People were ringing up on 105 and were saying, yeah, we know your postcode and we should be working on that tomorrow. But in actual fact, it was still in the fog of war. And it was at that point that we started offering people on the website and on phones, you need to be thinking about moving out of your house now. It was at that point when we said, this is unlikely to be back on till the weekend.
How are you going to fix it? What's the plan?
So, it was almost ready to go, which is one of the sad things for this storm. We have a new website, which is be trialled in Q1 and will be ready for Q2. The new website will have a better fault map with postcode tracking on there, and it will work out more correctly how you should be coming back on and when it's going to come back on. I wouldn't like to give it a month, but May, June time, it should be tested and running. And that's the sort of fix that we've got.
Okay. So I should have added on 2 things. So I mentioned the Storm Arwen. If you know constituents or mates, I shouldn't say, sorry, constituents. If you know friends or family who have not been compensated, the compensation number email is compensation-queries@northernpowergrid.com. And the team in the corner can give you all the details for that later on. Secondly, I know I should have mentioned about the Ofgem inquiry. We don't know when it's going to end, so it's still current, very much current. Everything that we're doing tonight is going to be part of it. Everything that you've submitted to us will be part of it. They say on their website that they hope to complete the inquiry and the simulation of evidence by the spring of this year. It's going to happen quite quickly, is my point. So my hope is that if you wish to write in, either do it through my office if that's easier, or you can contact Ofgem direct. I'd strongly urge you, if you contact Ofgem direct, is to copy my office in, because I'm going to do a much larger, bigger presentation, and I want to make sure everybody gets heard and everybody's ideas, from brilliant to not so brilliant, gets into the mix. I should have made the point also that Phil Hunter is here from the County Council, and I'm going to address the point about the other elephant in the room, which was why didn't the Local Resilience Forum call in government/army and other things at an earlier stage? And there's a blunt truth about it, which is everybody was relying upon the information from MPG as to how quickly this was going to be resolved. It was thought that it was going to be resolved quicker and faster and better than the practical reality turned out. And as things panned out and the realization occurred that that was not going to happen as quickly as everybody wanted to, those decisions were then had to be made. There is, how can I put it though? I mean, I spent some time with the Local Resilience Forum, and I spent some time with the Army, and there isn't a huge amount of difference between the Local Resilience Forum, which starts from day 1, and Local Resilience Forum plus Army members assisting. Because the practical reality, and I'll let Phil, if he needs to, give them more details, is the Local Resilience Forum have all social services, county council, police, ambulance, fire, all those organisations already involved. And they are the people on the ground who know, who are vulnerable, who are need particular visits and home visits. That is certainly the way in which it is. They can all try and answer in a bit more detail if necessary going forward. What I'm going to do is now, we've spoken enough. Where is Gillian? There she is, right. So Gillian, do you want to say who you are and give, without going on too long, give your sort of 2 to 3 minute overview and ask any questions you've got.
We live in the centre of Ponteland. We're just a mile from an international airport, so we're not out on the sticks. We were without power for 6 days. We couldn't get through to the grid. If any of the residents did manage to get through, they were told that they had power. We did not have any power for 6 days. On the website up until day 5, it said there was no power cut. It got so bad that the senior county council official who was working out of the silver room at West Hartland Fire Station had to come into our street and take a picture of it in the darkness to prove that what the residents were saying was true, that we had no power. In the midst of all of this, we then start to get updates saying that our power is going to return at 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock. I was patched into a call with your senior grid officials, Helen Priestley and Gavin San Giovanni, and she told me that those updates were meaningless, but the residents were relying on them for updates. They were scared to move out of their homes in case they were burgled. They were worried to move out in case the pipes burst, and they weren't in the house to turn water off. Some couldn't move out because of health conditions. There was people in their 90s absolutely freezing all through the night, and we couldn't get anybody to speak to. I called a resident meeting out on the Wednesday night on day 5. I asked if a grid official would come because of you, as you have said, that you couldn't take our calls and the website was wrong. Nobody would come from the grid to talk to 100 residents in Merton Hall on the Wednesday night, and that would have been your perfect opportunity to communicate some of this and explain what you were doing. In the midst of this, we're finding hotel rooms at 8 o'clock at night because we realised by then the power's not coming on. And we're now trying to make compensation claims, and people will put their cases forward, but without receipts for food, for example. Well, that was not at the top of my list. I still had to work that week, and I still had to make sure my child was in school. So I don't have receipts for everything, and I'm being told that I can't claim for things like meals, I can't claim for freezer and fridge loss. I would have spread the food around, I wouldn't have wasted it had I been told honestly right at the beginning how long this would be. If you had just been honest with people, come to the residents meeting, you could have communicated through Guy's team, who have been amazing in organising this tonight and got us to where we are at this point in time. There's the County Council, Lyle Darwin was very vocal. You could have communicated in lots of different ways. You could have come to Merton Hall where there was a welfare centre set up on the Tuesday. Day 4, can I just add, of all of this. But you did absolutely none of that and misled customers, and now you're telling us to claim on a house insurance, for example, for freezer. Well, it's not worth it with the excess, and why should we?
Okay, I'm going to get Paul to particularly answer, because plenty of people have raised it, freezers in particular. I think I'm going to take it as read that lots of people in the room had similar experiences of not getting communicated, not being told that they were going to be up and running within 24 hours, and generalised problems of getting information, particularly trying to get onto the phone number. Sorry, I'll take this off so I can speak. I'm just going to address the phone number point because I should have made it clear earlier. So the 105 number was established after previous difficulties and disasters, all right? And it definitely is the right way forward. The problem is there was such a massive volume of problems that websites crashed, phones weren't able to be answered. And there is a wider problem here, which government / local authority / businesses, particularly the businesses themselves, are going to have to address, which is where your own staff can't get to work because they are unable to man the phones. How on earth are we actually going to have a proper response team? Because it's all very well, and I've been to the MPG offices, and there's a big room bigger than this with people on phones answering stuff. If none of them can get to work either, how on earth can we make that happen? And I think that's a point you need to address. Can you try and address, and I'm going to lump it in as a sort of freezer / fridge / I wasn't able to go to a particular event, or how that compensation is dealt with amongst the £140 a day stuff.
Right, okay. So, first of all, clearly, very sorry to hear that particular story. And there is just one part of that that I'll ask Matt or Dave if they know. I don't understand how we didn't know you were off. That's the first thing to see. And I can see that would have caused some issues with our system. Matt or Dave, have you got any idea why he set up Ponteland?
Yeah, Michael.
Not me, no.
I'll take that stuff. So we did the introductions at the start. So my name's Matthew Preston. I'm the General Manager for Northumberland County Government Time and Waste. So I look after our operational leg. As Paul's described, this was a big event. I've got Dave, who's my engineering manager. You've been with Northern Power in how many years, Dave? 30?
Just over 40.
Just over 40.
Just Dave's poor man.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Dave's, my engineers have never seen anything of this size. So again, just to reiterate that. What we have, the way that the electricity distribution network operates, we have what we call network. So we take electricity from the national grid, then feeds down, gets through the various transformers down to the low voltage grid, which finds its way into your property. What we find on events of this magnitude, we have what we sometimes call masked faults. So we might repair the upstream high voltage. What we don't necessarily know is the low stream low voltage is off supply. In theory, we should have known about this. If you phoned in, every single property is linked to an address on the system. So again, if we can get some specifics at the back end, I'll certainly take that away and have a detailed look at that as a case study. But that's the one thing I can think of. Potentially we've got a low voltage mass fault out there that we thought was part of the larger high voltage. I mean, David, do you want to say anything?
Yeah. I mean, basically, on a simple LV fault that had been Ponteland, not a MIMP, we would have gone straight to your property and they would have known your street was off. Fault strategies on MIMPs is we've got to start from the start. So we go and we store HV because you can't have LV without the HV. So on this particular event, Saturday morning came in. To be honest, it was a case of who was on, not who was left on. You know, it was a massive event. Like Matt says, basically we start from the start. Everybody comes in, wants to restore the world, and you've got to take a step back and start looking and seeing sort of, you know, where do we start now? I know where Ponteland is, and I know where you feed. You know, I've done it for years. We've got to we build it up. So you restore your what we call main lines. So you get your bulk of your HV on, and then after that you do what we do with T's, which what we'll call HVTs. We'll rebuild them, and then we'll come to the low voltage, which is in the middle of Ponteland, where you live. So
Pontview,
yeah. So you come under the LV, you see, but this particular event is, you sort of, we get the HV back on, but we had an awful lot of LV damage as well. Now, like Matt says, I don't know why you, when you phoned in, were you saying you were getting told that you weren't? That you weren't?
Yeah, all of Pontview was basically told that they weren't off, and they most definitely were. I think the point is, clearly a mistake was made. We don't dispute that.
Yeah.
The bit that we're all interested in, I mean, obviously the people who are affected are pretty upset about it, but the bit that I'm really keen on is how do you get a system in place that means this doesn't happen to another mum or dad or elderly person or a vulnerable person, because 2 doors down from Gillian was a lady who was properly vulnerable, and that really matters. And listen, mistakes will be made. This is a mega storm. We all get that. But what I want to know is that there is plans in place so that these things don't slip through the net going forward, because then at least we are match fit for next time.
Yeah.
Paul, do you want to answer that?
I'll take that. What's important to understand is when you've got a nested LV fault in this way, the systems really don't know whether you're on or off. And the system, that's because the system is not measuring the voltage at any point south of that main LV mains that Dave spoke about. So we really don't have a computer system to tell us whether you're on or off. So when they were answering the phone and saying, when you finally got through, I appreciate the difficulty, you should be back on, because the fault that the first calls in that area were linked to was the HV fault. That's what Matt and Dave are saying. So this is how it would work. If it happened tonight, for example,
Let's not go there.
and half of Ponteland was off, we'd fix the HV, and we would expect all the LV to be back up, and it would be back up in an hour or less. But if there was some further damage, like a tree's gone over and knocked a pole over carrying the power to your street, we didn't know that had happened until you or somebody in your street rings up and says, we are off, and then we'd have to send a person out and have a look at it.
But I told your grid executives on the phone on the Tuesday, Helen Priestley.
Yes.
I told her on the Tuesday,
Yes.
I emailed directly into the silver room, and I told them, I rang every day, I rang everywhere, fire, police, councillors, I kept ringing and telling you guys that our street was without power. The council official took a photograph of our black street and you still didn't believe that the power was
I think
out.
the key point that Gillian and others, that's how you can sit down, it's okay. The key point is this: we know there's a fault in the system, all right? So the system is, if you have a problem, I'm going to put it into layman's language so we can understand it. If you have a problem further up the line, you can't then distinguish something lower down the line. The bit that you're going to have to get better at is working out how that happens. And the easiest way, I'm afraid, is that you have a better internet and a better control room so that people can report stuff. Because what definitely happened is you had such a fault further down the line, it was reported, but it doesn't get into the system, so it doesn't get actioned. Which is why this community of all of Pontview and Jackson Avenue and others ended up many, many, many days off for a very simple fault that could have been fixed like that if you'd had a better control room. Now, we know why you didn't have a better control room. The key bit is you've got to get it right in the future. Now, rather than getting in...
Sorry, guys, there's a further point which I think...
All right, but then you're getting on with freezers and things like that.
I will do, but when we try and shift it to the future, and we are continually investing in the network, there will be more LV monitors on the system going forward, so we will go ourselves. Secondly, and quite importantly, if anybody in this room has a smart meter, we're really pushing people to get smart meters, because what they do is they communicate with us directly. So the smart meter, the last thing it does on its way down
switched off.
is to send a message saying we're off.
That's
So
plugged into the
we're
wall,
hoping to
switch
have
off
smart
when the power
meters.
goes off.
Sorry,
They need power to make them work, isn't
No,
it?
no, they don't.
Well,
There's
all right.
probably more engineering brains in the room than me. But what I'm saying is that the meter, on its way out, its last gasp thing, it sends a signal that we get that says, I'm now off.
Not sure that happened on this occasion.
No, it didn't, because there was not enough people with smart meters yet.
Okay.
But that will happen.
I think I wouldn't bet your house on that particular argument. So can you address? All right, I'll come to you in a second, sir. Can you address fridges, freezers, the sort of miscellaneous expenses, how that is tied into the 140 and what happens there?
Right. So there's the categorisation of what we would describe as welfare payments, which are things like hot food, hotels, things like that to keep you welfare sorted. And then there's the compensation. The compensation starts off as guaranteed compensation, which you went way above in this case because of the hardship. That guaranteed compensation supposed to cover the fridge and the freezers and the incidentals, etc. So you wouldn't have a guaranteed compensation claim bucket A, a welfare claim for 5 dinners and 2 hotels bucket B, and then a freezer bucket C. The freezer bucket C is in bucket A under guaranteed standard payments. That's where that lands.
Yeah, I think so. Listen, and that's not, you can have as many goes as you like against MPG. That's applied across the board. That's not a individual company choice or anything like that. That's what Ofgem run. I think the serious point is that Gillian makes and lots of other people make is, I wasn't able to keep a receipt for the food I bought when I went to the hotel because I'm distraught about my child, or I'm worried about my mum, or I'm worried about my house. I think there has to be some flexibility and understanding so that when people go and speak to Victoria and Chris at the end and say, look, I'm trying my hardest to navigate through your system and it's not necessarily working, that really has to be done in a better way. Now, it's up to you to how you sort that out, but there's definitely people out there who don't have the documentation that we would all like, but not everybody is working in that way. When the lights are out, you're worried about everything going wrong.
And I'd like to reassure everybody in the room that we are doing our best. We're taking every person on a case-by-case basis position, and we are generally sorting people out. So, I will not say every claim in this room or every claim that comes in will be paid. That's not going to be right. But there is a fair degree of erring on the side of the customer here when they bought 6 meals the day before, then lost the receipt for the day after. It's likely to be the same thing. And people are operating in that manner. And just quick to clarify, since we've been underway with welfare payments, we've we've already paid out 335k in cash, and we've booked and paid for directly 1,300 hotel nights for people who needed hotels, and paid for food vans, and paid for food to be delivered, etc. So we are trying our best to reimburse people for the hardship that they suffered.
I'm going to crack on with questions, and so Alma, I'm going to come to you next, and I'll come to the gentleman with grey hair at the back there. Alma, you wanted to raise some points.
Yes.
Do you want to say where you live? You live 80 Runnymede Road, 99 Runnymede Road.
99 Runnymede Road.
Okay. And Runnymede Road, just so everybody knows, was off from Moor Road down to Fox Covert and all of Fox Covert and all of that particular part.
If I pick up from there, it was off because of two activities. One was at the corner of Fox Covert, subject to a tree coming down, and the other was actually directly opposite me, where a tree had come down onto a pole that had triggered off and this power to go off. My questions are all going to be based in the context that we have to take it for granted that we are subject to climate change. Climate change means that we are going to be subjected to a lot more of this type of weather, whether we like it or not. And we have to be prepared. Because of my original concern by the lack of information, and I don't want to dwell on obviously what has already gone, and Guy has put our case, I think, very well. Thank you very much. But the one point we haven't touched on is for those people who couldn't access their computer because the electricity was off. So it's no good putting it on the website because we can't see it. I don't actually have a mobile phone. So we were actually totally isolated. The context of my aggravation, I suppose, and annoyance is that within this area of 40 houses on Runnymede Road, which is supplied still by overhead cables, they need to go underground. Whatever the problems are, that's where they should be. Then there wouldn't be any problems. Because it took so long for somebody to come out initially to have a look, to make that assessment, I obviously don't know at what level that particular person was. But nothing happened for days. We were off for 7 days, and it took the 7th day before a crew turned up. The crew did so much that they could do, but they couldn't get up to the cables, which were suspended over somebody's drive. It took a resident to organise a private cherry pickup for the lads to get up there, to which, to make sure that the job was completed in the shortest space of time, rightly or wrongly, my husband took over the traffic control so that the 4 lads could be well and truly working on getting the cables which had snapped put right. I can interject here and say at the moment we've had you back out again because we're getting flickering, the lights, electricity, with surging, to which we have been told that it needs a little bit of tweaking with the routing of it. We're most probably at the end of the line, and that's why we are still subjected, and we will have a monitor or something at the substation to do it. That has never happened. I'd like it to happen as soon as possible, please. I went on to the internet as soon as I could get electricity, and that's where I came across what Guy was talking about there, the major incident response and severe weather section on your, I'm going to call it your strategy and policies document. And I must admit, when I read, and I'm going to quote for the benefit of the audience here, robust and well-practiced emergency plans in place to respond to any major incident affecting the local electricity distribution network. We are aware of the risks and have trigger levels in place to escalate our response. Now, obviously, my question to that was, why did it take so long for you to respond, even though it was a devastating emergency? I think you've answered that as best you can.
Alma, I'm going to stop you there because we can go for a while. There's a few points made. I'm going to let you come back in if there's any further points. I'm going to summarise it on the two key things I want to know about, which is underground rather than overground, because in certain areas, what's the policy there? What's the long-term plan? And there is a legitimate point that Alma really raises, which is a really good point, which applies across the board, across the north and northeast in particular, is there are a number of people who have still got temporary repairs. Some of them, I believe, are still on large generators. Some of them have had a repair and it's not quite been fixed. When do you think, and I'm not holding you to a precise date with every house because I know it's an ongoing process, when do you think the sort of things that she's got in Runnymede Road and other communities have got will be up and running and fixed? Can you give a ballpark on that? I'm not holding you to a precise date.
I'll mention the generator one first.
Yep.
There are some temporary situations at the moment. There are 10 generators up in the College Valley, up near Kielder. They're the only generators on the system from the storm Arwen. So there's no big generators on there. The network is electrically intact, as it should be right now. So it is electrically intact. There are some mechanical type repairs with stairs or bits and pieces that need to be done on the network, but essentially the work is correct electrically. So I don't know, Matt, maybe you'll have to take details and find out what the flickering story is around there. But essentially, from the storm, we're back. And remembering that in the middle of the storm, there was another big wind event that happened that took 10,000 customers off in the Rothbury area in West Yorkshire. So there was other storms that came through, so you can't always patch one weekend's worth of damage into a particular fault.
Without sounding like a womble, but underground, overground?
Yeah, interesting. There will be more undergrounding as we go forward, because we're expecting a lot more people, if you read our plans, to have electric vehicles and heat pumps rather than using gas. And we're going to stop using gas in the UK, I'm sure everyone knows that. So we are expecting a lot more undergrounding of LV as we go forward. But the bulk LV that you see in fields going out, for example, up to the Weir Valley, where we rebuilt 60 kilometres of overhead line at 20 kV, that is usually found at this point uneconomic on a risk-based, who's prepared to pay type basis. And that's not me saying that, that's the evidence across the globe. This is how rural electrification is done on overhead lines. So it's not just about overhead lines as one category. There's different types of overhead lines. I think what we're talking about is bundled conductor on poles. Is that right, Dave? That we have coming downstream. And over the years, those things will be changed to cable. That obviously means digging streets up and putting it in. And what you've got to bear in mind is that we're in a storm now. We're talking about the storm damage. That's a 1 in 50-year storm, and the electricity supply is 99.9% reliable. So it's what additional cost are we prepared to put in as society to get that? And that's a debate which I am sure will come out in the off-gem discussions and the base discussions. I think we need to understand there's an economic risk-based approach that we take.
All right. I'll let you come back in if necessary. Gentleman with the greyish hair in the blue top, you wanted to raise a question.
Yes, I did. We're at 77 Damras Road, and one point to make is we went down at 8 o'clock before the main storm hit at 10, reported it, and it was an underground. We have an underground supply that went down. Yes, and I raised an incident. I finally got through on the phone after would take until whatever to be fixed. On the Thursday night at midnight, I was staying at a daughter's. I got a phone call on my mobile to tell me my power was back, and it wasn't. Friday morning, I phoned again. It took an hour and a half for me to get through, and said, no, our power's still off. Oh, we'll have to investigate that. And sent an engineer out and found, oh yes, you're still off. And had to send an underground team to come and dig up opposite side of the road to fix it. Why was my original incident closed without my consent? Why was a separate incident then had to be raised when I phoned on the Friday morning, which was fixed? I've had no communication about compensation. I filled in the form on the 5th on the website that you've talked about. I had an automatic response which said you may have to wait up to 10 days to hear anything, and I've still not heard anything. I was off from the 26th to the 3rd of the 12th. 7 days. Nothing. No communication back.
Well, the good news is you are going to get compensated.
The other point I'd like to make,
Sure.
following from what Gillian said, is surely when someone says their power is off, you shouldn't assume that it's come back on until you finally checked. So you shouldn't have assumed that Pontview was back on. You just should have assumed it was not on, even though you fixed something else in high volume, until you finally checked. The default should be the customer's right in what they said. So going forward, I would suggest that your system needs to take that into account. The other thing is, you talked about smart meters. Smart meters rely on us having a mobile reception in the house. And our signal, I mean, Darras Hall has got a very large number of black spots for mobile.
We all know that.
So we can't get a smart meter. They won't work.
So, I'm going to pause you there, sir. So, I'm aware that in some parts of Darras Hall, Runnymede Road, there's a gentleman who has written in from number 80 Runnymede Road, I don't know if he's here today, but also yourself. There are several particular houses in the Darras Hall area who have not received compensation, and I really think you guys at MPG need to look at that. I'm certainly going to ask the gentleman to speak to the team at the end, because that will happen, and I will ensure that there is follow-up in respect of your street and Runnymede Road, because I know both those streets have not been addressed. Pontview, to be fair, has been addressed, and other places have been, and the majority have. But look, we all get there are gaps in the system, and I repeat, if anybody knows of anybody who has not been accommodated on this or hasn't been contacted for whatever reason, then please let us know. Please get them to get in contact. And if they're not getting through, please come to me, because trust me, they will get answered. Paul, do you want to address some of the points?
Yeah.
I accept, and I'll help you by saying, I'm quite sure you can't explain why it was off underground at this particular stage, but this gentleman definitely needs a visit and a proper explanation, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. So I can see what's happened to a certain extent. I don't know what's happened really, but the underground fault is probably not related to the storm. I'm going to just put two and two together and get 5.
Can I just say that
Please.
on the 4th of November, our power went off in the morning. A guy came out and fixed it immediately, and we have 3-phase supply to our house, not all of which he used, and he just switched one of the phases. He said, in theory, somebody should come out within a week and fix the underground cable that's gone.
I see.
3 weeks later, our
Right.
power went off again, and nobody had been out to fix it. So that may shed some light.
Yes, it may. It looks like Matt, we're going to take that away and have a look at it.
Yeah, I'll say
That's
we-
classic nest. It's a nested fault. So that's why they were saying your fault has been put with another incident that we're dealing with. probably why you got the text or the phone call to say that you were back on, because all of that area we were expected to be back on. That seems to be the cause of the error here.
What we'll say as well is, whilst the event was predominantly overhead, we still did get some underground faults, as Dave will know. Certainly in the higher ground with the snowfall and the saturated ground. Might not be the case through here, but that might be it. Sometimes what can happen when we carry out a temporary repair, so in your case with a three-phase supply for everyone's benefit, you effectively got 3 cores within the cable, you effectively strap one to the other to restore supplies, but it's a temporary fix. What can happen that temporary repair can fail.
Yes.
So we'll certainly take some details up here, we'll take a look at that and we'll see if we can prioritise that repair.
This connection under the road went about 5 years ago, and we had a generator then for about 12 hours.
And have you got the new cable in now, or are you still
I
waiting?
have no idea,
We don't
because
know.
by that
It's
time,
done something. They came and dug up opposite side of the road, did
We were not
something,
there.
and they've got us back up there.
We
No one's told us.
The other point I was going to say is that about the filling the form in on the internet, I'd like to give everybody a little bit more hope that we're working through those. There are about 1,600 in our workflow at the moment, and we are working through them. We will get to you. If you fill the form in on the internet, I'm sure Chris and Victoria will check that it's in the system, but if you fill that form in, it will be in the workflow and it will be worked through.
Okay. Someone's going to come and visit you very soon, trust me. That is going to happen. I'm going to take anybody else's questions in a second, so stick your hand up if you want to raise more questions. We can go as late as, I'll come to you in a second. We can go as late as 8, but obviously, I'll come to you in a second. I'm not necessarily going to keep you all here too late, unless we absolutely have to. I just want to make one point, and then I'll come to this lady here, and then I'll come to you at the second, all right? On phones, I haven't really given you the sort of breakdown on that. There's a lot of work being done on that. So neither Vodafone nor EE can be here tonight. I've got representations from them. I'm not going to read them out in detail, but obviously they send their apologies and they are working on how it is you get a network in a better way going forward. BT is the particular problem, and they also have got to get the system much better. Clearly, it's going to be one of my strong recommendations on a massive level that both MPG, the local resilience forum, and probably parish councils get a much greater supply of generators so that there is the ability to respond on a localised level, particularly for vulnerable people, in advance, so that there is a store already there, everybody knows it. We do all this with flood forums at the present stage, Northumbrian Water, the county council, already all have this stuff in place. We need to have the similar approach going forward. There's a bit of management on that, there's a bit of storage, and there's cost involved, but it is very much doable, and it is the obvious solution to capability, particularly for those who are vulnerable. Now, I'll come to the lady here in the orange top. You wanted to ask a question?
Yes, hi. I don't want to dwell on Pontview, but I think it's important for you to know going forward what really happened so you can understand how to help. We didn't lose the power due to the storm. We lost power at lunchtime the following day, and we found out through our own investigations afterwards that the fuse was removed deliberately by an engineer the following day because a nearby farm has a power supply from our street. We have underground cables. A nearby farm had some damage, and on the Saturday morning when engineers came out, the quickest thing to do to stop that was to take the fuse out from the substation in our street. So of course, lunchtime, power goes off. Are there 50 houses?
Yeah.
Phoning the power grid saying my power's just gone off. That's 50 different reports daily, and for some reason, internally, your system was cancelling our job. So despite the fact that we were telling you what was wrong, why it happened and what was going on, we couldn't get anybody, any engineers. So the engineer, even just our local sort of engineer centre, they didn't know, the foreman didn't know, the engineers didn't know that we had no power. And I think it sounds like a very similar situation for you too. So we understand, I mean, the engineers were absolutely amazing. We understand that this was unprecedented and that this was unbelievable, but it was actually a really simple thing to do to fix our street. And when engineers finally came and looked at them, I think it took them half an hour to solve the problem and switch us back on. So I think it's really important that whatever happens in the future, there has to be a way for a localised way for engineers to know where to go to next and where to fix the problem.
I think that the key bit is, so we all get that this is a system run off a computer, right? And we all get that you've got resilience plans down the years and you've prepared for this. But when the shit hits the fan, for want of a better word, when things go wrong, what happens is people do stuff with perfectly laudable reasons and just take the fuse out to protect people for a safety point of view, but that doesn't get into the system. And the thing that you need to go away and really look at the business that you run and the computer system you run is that how, when your people on the ground are doing stuff, it is logged in. Because quite clearly, that I remember so well, repeatedly, myself and Tom from my office were absolutely on the phone to Pontview throughout this, trying to get it back on. And it was only when we absolutely bullied MPG to make the case that actually it is definitely off and you are wrong, that there was a realisation that someone would come out. And that's the fault. It's not the fault of an individual. It's not the fault of, frankly, wasn't even anything to do with the storm by and large. It's just the system that you are running as an organisation is not match fit for dealing with a big crisis. And the takeaway for you guys, it seems to me, is how are you better prepared going forward? There is genuine upset, spilt milk, lost fridges and freezers and lives and complications, and we all get that. And whoever turned the fuse off did so for perfectly laudable reasons. But that's the bit I really want you to try and make clear that you will be addressing.
Yep, thanks very much for that. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's important that we hear this stuff and understand it, because our systems, if you can understand how many reports and information came in between Berwick and Lincolnshire, it was massive, and that's where we've said we need a better website, a better way of recording it, and a better postcode tracking, which we're on with, a better remote voice answering on the telephone as well, which we've got put into us. So we do hope that'll happen. But that story there about getting the information back into our system, the normal route of that is that the engineers would fill in some details that would go onto a system called ONS, and the control room and the operators would be able to read it out. Why that's not going on this time, Mark or Dave, have you got any ideas?
And again, just to apologise again, in terms of specific details, as I said, I haven't got the answers. That's been honest. We'll take it away. I want to learn. We all want to learn from this. Where the specific examples where the process and all the systems let us down, we will learn from it, and that's guaranteed. So again, we can catch up again. We'll get some more specific details.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Lady in the corner there, yes please.
Thank you, yeah. I live about 3 miles north of Matchburn, and we were actually off for 12 days, so I think we get a cabbage tonight. We realised it was a very complicated thing because it's on a little, very much, sort of on a separate line to 5 houses. But we had no information whatsoever for the first week. And the thing that worried us a lot was that we had no way to communicate because nothing worked. We actually managed to get an old handset which linked up to the landline directly to BT. So after a couple of days we were able to use the landline and communicate with our family and so on. But other houses on the farm couldn't do that.
Can I just be clear, are you Line Up Hill Farm?
Line Up Hill
I
Farm,
thought you were,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
So you're Ingo, go to Matford,
Just
2.5, 3 miles
yes,
north.
yes.
Right.
So although it sounds as if it's very remote, it's not. It's, just it happens to be that area. What we were worried about was if there was an emergency and we couldn't actually communicate with emergency services, my husband, who's left, is actually vulnerable. And so we had no means at all for a couple of days, and then we, as I said, we got the old handset and did that. The lack of communication about the power wasn't the main worry. The worry was about communicating more widely. So you mentioned 1 or 2 things about phone lines and BT, but the point I wanted
when you're thinking about resilience and all the rest of it, are there any plans about maintaining some kind of emergency communication when such a thing might happen again? There was actually a letter in the Courant about this issue, which I brought with me because it summed it up very well. If BT isn't able to, provide that kind of service, is the government, the county council or anyone thinking about these issues about communication?
So, I'll take that because it's mainly for me.
Yeah, I'm addressing it to
No, it's okay.
yes.
So the lady who wrote the letter was from Otterburn,
Yes.
and she's similarly affected.
Yes.
There's a really stroppy lady, very nice lady, but she's very stroppy, who lives down in the Allen Valleys, who I can assure you, when I have that meeting, is going to make that point.
Yes, and I emailed you yesterday. I don't know if you haven't mentioned it, but I did send you an email yesterday.
You do, and you're Jean Conti, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes, I've got it in front of me. So, the answer is that there's a couple of answers. So the first thing is, there is already a pre-existing emergency network. So police, ambulance, fire, particularly, have a radio frequency that could work come what may.
We didn't know that.
No, I know that. Very few people do know that.
Yeah.
So that is for a national emergencies, frankly, war, major terrorist events, things like that. That's off radio, basically.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So that there are a series of radio masts around the country that allow them to connect, come what may. All right. It isn't sufficient for the wider public to then piggyback in the event of a crisis like this. Okay. However, there is quite clearly, we are now in an electricity-driven age where when the power goes out and you can't use your mobile phone because you haven't got the power, and lots of people don't have a landline, and you can't use internet, how are we going to fix that? Now, my suspicion is, certainly in the rural areas, most people are going to buy a baby generator to run their own life in the event of difficulties, which are relatively cheap. There is always a cost to these things, but as a backup plan which can charge mobile phones and computers to a kettle and things like that. They are genuinely very small. They certainly wouldn't run your house, they don't run your freezers and things like that, but it at least gives you some emergency power. There is a sort of wider, so that's what some people are going to do, and I know lots have done it already.
We should have a...
Okay, but the reason we're having tonight, the reason why there's an Ofgem inquiry, the reason why the County Council is doing it is to try and address this. There is a much wider, much harder problem to address, which is, so BT have masts. Some of their masts went down. So the mast in Otterburn, as I understand it, went down, so you lost BT power and you lost capability. Certainly the one in the Allen Valleys at Sparty Lee, that went down. And that they are just like telegraph poles or power poles. They can get blown over or hit by a tree just like anything else. I'm not totally sure there's anything anybody can do if they get taken out as well. But there is a resilience planning amongst the sort of BT going forward. And I'll give you one example which gives, I hope, some hope, is that I spent last Friday with the Forestry England in Kielder, who again had exactly the same problem. They all lost all their communications, and they have realised that they are going to have to get generators as backup so that they can communicate, so that they have an ability to go forward. There is only really three ways forward. Either you have things that are more secure, going along the lines that Paul and others are talking about, which is you make it uglier and more stronger and better able to withstand wind and things like that, and in some cases that will be the case. Secondly, you go down the generator route as a backup, and you have things like automatic generators that kick in when you lose your electric, and that is a legitimate point that Ofgem and Department of Business should look at, in my view. And thirdly, you have individual choices that people will make, particularly in outby areas, where they're thinking, I may not be able to. If you have another biblical event like we've had before, there will be examples where we're going to be out for a bit, I may need to create some backup for myself. Now, none of those are perfect. All of this is difficult, and all of this requires some heavy thinking and a degree of planning going forward. But that's what tonight's about. It's what this process is about. It's what you've got three separate organisations, and I didn't read out from Ofgem dialing in through this. I didn't read out what they said, but they particularly have said
that they're doing a review to see if there are things that the industry could learn from this response in order to improve our support to consumers. And there are rules on how network companies need to operate in these circumstances, but also focus on the resilience of the system and the emergency response, including communications with customers. Now, it is not acceptable that you can't contact people, because you're totally right. If there was an ambulance need or there was a fire brigade need, this is a really serious issue, and we all need to look at that. And fortunately, we had a 10 to 14 day major event, and that didn't result in awful consequences and disasters in those, as far as I'm aware, in those circumstances. But that was luck, frankly, in the circumstances. I haven't really answered you as well as I'd like to, but because there aren't any easy answers there. But I can assure you we're on it.
Yeah, but I think I just wanted to put it on the table because
Sure.
I didn't feel it had been put on the table for this meeting tonight.
Okay.
And also, I think it is a very serious issue that that needs a lot of thought from people who do have the power to actually, suggest how changes could
How
be
can I
made.
put it? The easy stuff, actually,
Yeah.
you may not think it, given what we're talking about, the easy stuff is actually the power.
Yeah.
Frankly, because making the system more resilient, having their comms room better, working out that if you call them, that the person's, that when you call the number, it goes automatically to somebody's home rather than if they can't get into work. That's how emergency planning works, and that improving emergency planning and improving the system, it requires work and better systems, but it's doable. That sort of stuff is really complicated, and it's not going to be fixed overnight, but we're on it, I promise you. I haven't got many other hands up. I've got one gentleman there, and if that's the last question, I'll come back to Alma briefly, and then I'll probably just wrap it up and allow anybody who wants to raise things with anybody individually to crack on. Yes, sir.
It's a question about whole element point of view. Also, we've gone through the situation with that. I've got the check through, thank you, which I'm very pleased to see. It's very generous. I could have been lying on the beach in Tenerife and would have still got the same check. The point being that you've already said that we should have been told at a certain time we should have moved up our houses. We weren't. Some people did, some people didn't. I made the conscious choice to stay there myself and bear it up for 6 nights, freezing cold street in total darkness. As it's already been highlighted in the look as far as crime and damage is concerned. You've mentioned welfare payments and compensation, which broadly covers things. I feel there should be some kind of like a hardship type payment. Do you know what I mean by that? There should be something that should be advised, we should be able to claim a certain amount. I don't know if you can take that forward at all.
Well, without answering your point clearly about asking how much money that was paid, but just ballpark numbers, the guaranteed standard, I think I'm going to get this right, it's £70 after so many hours, in this case 48 hours, and then £70 for every 12 hours after that. And we changed that to £140 and removed the cap. There was a cap that was in there that would stop. We removed that cap so that I think somebody could be paid 1,820 of that order if you were off for the whole story.
Yeah.
So we've taken. We thought that was the fairest thing to do, rather than receive 35,000 inquiries about my story. I want that one. I want this one. We thought the thing to do was to act straight away. 80% of our payments went out before Christmas, and they were not double in all the cases, but once they got to a certain point, they were practically double what the guaranteed standard should have been.
Yeah.
And we will cover that welfare piece as well for hot meals, etc.
As far as the hardship people is concerned, yeah.
So there isn't. I'll answer that, and I'll slightly push back on MPG on one thing. So there isn't a separate hardship payment. Okay, it doesn't exist. There is a question of whether going forward such a thing should exist. To be fair, how successive governments and independent regulators have done this is that they have the 70 to 140 depending on the incident per day. Then they have specific welfare for hotels, food and the like. All right, and your freezer is included in the 140 sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There is also, I'll have a slight pushback in that it wasn't all MPG. There was a lot of pressure from Ofgem.
they're not here tonight, but they would, if they were here, they would say they made it very, very clear that this should be done up to the 140 in these particular circumstances. But there is one key point which I really want to stress, which is this, that you have to have a relatively simple system, all right? And the reason why this really matters is for low-income households, because the MBG did lots of stuff wrong. We all know that, and had to deal with a major event, but things went wrong. We've heard some of them tonight. But to their massive credit, and Lord knows we certainly pressed them, they did get tens of thousands of checks out really, really quickly. And why that particularly matters is you can't do this if you've got a really complex system. Because if you've got to deal with 35, 45, 55,000 claims, you've got to have a system where you press a button and it goes, find my customer, pay them what it's earned, and it's done automated. The beauty of that is almost everybody got a check by Christmas time, which if I'm a low-income household who's had to spend money and really struggled, and although there are other resources that you can go and get assistance for, that really makes a difference. And then there's a genuine point, tonight's a good example of it, you then have a mop-up of you haven't actually taken advantage, looked at this particular point, points that Gillian and others have raised, well, hang on a second, what about this? I didn't have a receipt. But the very good point is everybody gets a check for the 140 times however many days it was once it kicks in, and it's pretty much a standardized thing, and as long as you've got enough checks and a big enough checkbook, it just runs out and it's done really fast. There's the moment you make the system more complex, the ability to do that gets much harder. So, and I'm defending Ofgem's approach here, but I do think, for me as a constituency MP, the most important thing is I'm a low-income household who I'm having to look after. Those people get a check really quickly, and then you have a mop-up, of which tonight is a good example. It's not a great answer for you, but I hope you can see why.
Just looking back or looking forward, things like that, it's happened again. And we think, should I move out or should I move in or stay in the house? We're thinking about just doing it with a tenant.
Well, I think going forward, if this happens again, you're going to get much better comms that doesn't say to you 24 hours, 24 hours, 24 hours, because they're going to run their system way better, so you'll actually have a realistic understanding. But that was part of the problem that made people get, frankly, upset and uncertain as to where they were going. But you have the capability of moving into a hotel, but people have worries about houses, dogs, animals, pipes, burglaries, everything. Alma, I'm going to let you come back and have what I think is going to be the last word, and then I'm going to do something that no one ever does, which is finish the meeting early.
Right. Just to continue on, if you don't mind, on this particular subject, I don't know how you assessed our names, addresses, or whatever. However, I would like to ask why you sent out checks to unoccupied or not built dwellings.
Well, I've heard a lot of stories, comments, etc. in the last 2 weeks about what we have to. I've never heard that one. Built dwelling, so that's a first.
Yes,
We'll take it away. But it must be. We went down. Thank Guy for mentioning the strategy of the simple story, which leaves us with around about, I'll say 1,600 today of queries. But there was the first 24,000 records that we had names for. We knew the times, and therefore we ran the algorithms and the computer systems to work out the payments and write the checks. Then there's another batch, around about 6,000, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000, where there's something missing, like we haven't got their name, but we know the house was off, or we know they were off for a period of time, but we couldn't, for our systems, be absolutely sure of what times they were off. So we sent them letters, and we've sent over 5,000 letters to them people, and we need to get a form back from them to say, this is my name,
Excuse
not
me.
that.
I appreciate what you're saying. You're restating the same thing again. What I'm saying is, these people, if they do get the check, are not even entitled to it.
No.
That's one point.
Well, we'll have to take it away. I can't imagine why somebody on the system. And
I'm going to wrap it there. So
listen, I'm going to finish with a couple of quick key points, then let everybody go home and go home to their well-lit homes now. The first is, if you know anybody who is out of the system, not aware of this, please get in contact. Either you go to Northern Power Grid Direct, please come to my office. There are ways of doing this. There are county councillors who've been here. Veronica Jones is there, who looks after the Matford area and also parts of Pont. Richard Dodd was here. Lyle couldn't make it tonight, but there's various other ones are here. The second is, everything we say tonight has been taken into account and will go into the Ofgem inquiry. If you particularly want to put your views in separately and want to go off and give a bit more detail, and I accept by the nature of a public meeting, this is a short, sharp version, and you haven't got the chance to really set your story out, then please do. We'd love you to do so. The more community involvement, the better. We need to ensure that Northumberland's voice is truly heard when this is considered by a regulator who has to cover the whole country. And it wasn't here, didn't understand it, and whilst they're watching us right here and now, we will make a report to them. The more input you do, the better. Please do. Please copy in my office when you do that, so I've got a record of it as well. We will do some follow-up. If you're a glutton for punishment and you want to come and hear other areas, I will be live with many of these lovely people who've given up their time, from Northumbrian Water, from the County Council, from MPG, in Bellingham tomorrow night at 6 o'clock in the Village Hall, and in 2 weeks' time in Hexham on a Thursday, and then Friday in the Allen Valleys. And again, if you've got mates from those areas who you think, oh, you haven't heard anything, then please let them know so that they can come down and understand what we're trying to do. There will be plenty of things that we probably haven't covered in the detail you would like, even though we've been going for an hour and 40 minutes. But again, please don't be shy of feeding it in. You can write into me, you can email into me. My team are here, there are county councillors here. And my final thing is, clearly this is a COVID-safe environment to the best of our possible abilities. Please, when you leave, try not to congregate in groups and have lovely chats. And we'll just take advantage of the fact that we're just going to have to just head on out. There's only one exit, I'm afraid, and we will open it up properly. But please, can I finish by saying a massive 2 thank yous. The first is the massive thank you to everybody who's come from an organisation to represent. You know, there's 5 people here from Northumberland Water, there's 6 from MPG, there's a county councillor here. Whatever one's views of how it all happened, I assure you they are taking this very seriously. They really are. And it is massively to their credit that they have got involved, that they've turned up, they've stuck their hand up, come along, answered questions. Not an easy gig, as you can imagine, but these are all local people who are trying to provide local services to you, and we should respect that and really appreciate that they're trying their best. And the second is a massive thank you to you. I really appreciate you've given up a lovely Thursday night when you could be doing all manner of other things, and I really appreciate you coming down and shown everybody and communicated to everybody what is taking place. If you've got other friends who want to do so, there are other events obviously, but please get in touch. Travel safely. We hope we don't have another incident like this again, but I can assure you if it did happen, we're going to be a lot